in affiliation with Boss Rush Games. Please visit Boss Rush Games and follow them at the links below to read reviews, hear podcasts, and for all things video game related. Boss Rush Games. Play games. Be better. RPGs and simulation games are two genres that, when mixed together, can create some incredibly immersive and fun worlds to play in. We've talked about the Dark Cloud and Suikoden series of games previously, but there are so many others that take this approach, especially in recent years. The farming genre, in particular, has been used as inspiration for RPGs to varying degrees. Most Pokemon games, for instance, allow for the player to plant berries that can give their pocket monsters an edge, while the Rune Factory franchise lets players invest in an entire fantasy farm that they can then tend to when they aren't out questing and slaying monsters. Sakuna of Rice and Ruin is one of the latest of these genre-blending games, and does so by adopting a complex rice farming mechanic alongside its 2D platforming action and RPG-style progression system. Players take control of Lady Sakuna, a harvest goddess who is a deity in the fictional Japanese-inspired country of Yamato. Sakuna is a completely spoiled princess who has the appearance of a young child, but is actually untold centuries old. She aspires to just lay about all day, partaking in only the greatest pleasures of life, such as gorging on the finest foods, reading the most superb literature, and drinking lots and lots of prime sake. One day, a group of mortals unwittingly wander into the mystical lofty realm where the gods reside, and Sakuna, in a drunken stupor, attempts to shoo the humans away, yet she clumsily starts a massive fire that destroys the entirety of the ceremonial harvest, a gift which is to be presented to the ruling deity, Lady Kamahitsuki. Enraged with Sakuna's irresponsible behavior, Lady Kamahitsuki banishes the harvest goddess and the trespassing mortals to the so-called Isle of Demons, a land that once belonged to the gods but is now overrun with vicious monsters. The group is forbidden to leave the island until they can replace the bountiful harvest that they ruined and rid the land of the demons for good. What follows is an adventure of personal growth and reflection, a tale that sees Sakuna redeem herself for her transgressions, form new relationships with humankind, reflect on her status as a powerful deity, and fully discover her untapped power. Sakuna of Rice and Ruin was made by developer Edelweiss, a studio that initially consisted of only 2 men before growing to roughly 10 individuals over the course of development. The game was designed to directly address the criticisms of the studio's previous game, the 2014 shoot-'em-up Astbreed, by having considerably larger length, a much more involved story, and richer world building. In Sakuna of Rice and Ruin, the player's time will be split between tending to their rice farm and adventuring out across the island, gathering materials and slaying demons. Both sides of this gameplay are rather complex and well made, although they do have their equal share of problems. Because Sakuna is a harvest goddess, her overall stats grow based on her annual harvest of rice. You see, Sakuna doesn't grow more powerful by defeating enemies or completing quests, but by producing a higher quality of rice each year. The minerals and nutrients that you feed into the soil, and in turn into your crop, pass on to Sakuna after you've collected your yearly harvest. The rice farming aspect of the game is thus quite immersive, and feels much more like actual farming compared to even the most dedicated farming sims out there. First, you'll need to till the soil of your farmland, and remove weeds and rocks from it, so you'll have uninhibited soil to work with. Next, you'll need to fertilize the ground with various waste, perishables, and minerals, so that your crop's strength is in the areas that you want to most improve. This is followed by preparing your seeds by mixing them in mud and water and later salt to weed out the weak seeds and procure only the strongest ones. Next comes the planting, where you will need to lay out the seeds individually across your tilled farmland. As the rice grows over the course of the year, you'll need to monitor the water levels, raising and draining it as necessary so as to provide an ideal temperature. You'll also need to routinely fertilize the soil and remove pesky weeds and pests from your crops. Once grown, you don't just collect your bounty with your sickle like you may in other games, but you'll also need to lay them on wooden racks to fully dry. Once ready, you'll lastly thresh and hull the individual rice stalks until you have your desired rice harvest. If you are a fan of Harvest Moon, Stardew Valley, or other similar farming games, then you'll know just how involved the process I just described is, compared to the simple methods used in other titles. In other games, you mostly just plant, water, and collect your crops once they're grown, so it is refreshing to see a lot more care and thought put into the process this go around. Each year in the game is appropriately split across 4 seasons, but also, unlike a lot of other games of this genre, each season is only 3 days long. This allows time to go by much more quickly, thus your harvest will occur more rapidly than you may be used to, but it also means that players will need to perform certain tasks on certain days if they want to maximize their yield, and the game leaves very little room for error. A positive of this more detailed approach is that during each step, you have access to different options in which to steer your crop and get different benefits. Often, choosing to go one way will lead to a larger harvest of lesser quality, while focusing on other aspects will generate superior quality with a diminished yield. You can choose to plant your seeds close together or far apart, keep the water temperature higher or lower than average, or even hold them completely to get refined white rice, or just a little bit for brown rice. You may be tempted to aim for just the high quality of rice, as it gives permanent stat boost to Sakuna, but you have the option of allowing one of the human villagers prepare a meal every night based on the ingredients that you have procured, including the rice. These meals provide temporary boosts to your stats and can grant momentary buffs such as greater damage, resistances to elements, and strengthen specific attacks, which can make taking on particular enemies much easier. All of these boosts are typically good for about 1 full day, after which they deplete and Sakuna will need to eat again. Towards the midway point of the game, you may also trade some of your rice for exotic and rare ingredients and items. It's in this way that the player will need to decide each and every year what kind of harvest that they are aiming for, as there are potential benefits either way you take it. As mentioned previously, your farm is also home to the humans that trespassed into the godly realm, and each of them have a role to play in aiding Sakuna on her adventure. The samurai Talmon has little talents, as he is unskilled in both combat and the arts, but he does have a passion for farming, and joyfully lends a hand in sharing his knowledge when needed. Kenta is a young orphan boy who is admittedly a bit headstrong, but his talents in blacksmithing are exceptional, and he can create most any farm tool if provided with the right materials. The mild-mannered Yui, another young war orphan, desires to be a seamstress, though she is too shy to let anyone watch as she performs her weaving. Myrte is a foreign missionary, a scholar of religion and culture, and is also well versed in cooking and medicine, thus she can craft meals and other consumables with the ingredients on hand. Lastly, young Kaimaru is just barely old enough to walk and talk, yet while most of the village cannot understand him, he has a keen ability to connect with animals and can steer them to aid the village whenever necessary. Some of the best parts of the game come from the interactions of these human villagers and the young goddess Sakuna. Initially, they butt heads, with Sakuna being too stubborn to take responsibility for their fate, while the mortals are far too untrained to reverse their fortunes. I found great joy in seeing the cast growth over the course of the game, which is made better with some impressive voice acting for each of our characters. tending to your farm is a complex matter, and this opens the game up for quite a few shortcomings that can lead to a good deal of frustration. Case in point, the game largely doesn't explain too much of the farming process to you in detail. It does give you plenty of pointers, but rarely is it direct enough that you feel confident that you are doing things correctly. For instance, after the first few times of planting my seeds, I would be told that I was planting them too far apart. I then switched things up, trying to better space them apart, only to be told that they were now too close. It was only later in the game, after I uncovered a farming book while exploring, that I learned that planting my rice too far apart can actually increase the quality of the rice, which is what I wanted to begin with. Even after armed with this knowledge, the game still doesn't specify just how close is too close and how far is too far, and as such, I would still goof up my spacing from time to time. Speaking of planting, you'll notice that you have to lay your seeds manually, quite unlike most other farming games. You may attempt to go for precision, both to make your farm aesthetically pleasing and to satisfy that too close, too far issue, but good luck. The controls for planting allow for little accuracy, so if you're a little OCD like me, this will frustrate you to no end. You just cannot reliably place your seeds in any orderly way, so don't even try. There are similar issues with most all steps in the planting process. Sakuna may state that the field needs just a little bit of water, but how little is little? 30% full? 10? I understand that a focus of the game is guesswork, and making incremental changes to your farming technique every year, but some more guidance could go a long way in eliminating these little annoyances. Lastly, I wish there was just a little bit more that you could do on your farm other than harvest rice. Yeah, I know that this is a rice farming game, but considering how detailed it is in the actual farming of the rice, I think it would be pretty awesome to go into that same amount of detail when I want to turn my crop into a special type of dish or brew it into sake. Instead, you go through some boring menus and choose what you want to do with it, and voila, it happens. Sakuna's strength is when it stands out from other farming RPGs, so when it does things traditionally, well, it comes off as a bit lazy and uninspired. You do get access to some ducks late in the game, which you can collect eggs from on some days, but that's really about it. You don't even really need to tend to the ducks either. It's all extremely bare bones compared to the complexity of the rice farming, and that creates somewhat of a disconnect. The rest of the game is spent on 2D platforming sections, exploring levels, collecting items, and having all-out brawls with enemies. The levels that you explore are often short, with the majority you'll be able to complete in only a few minutes. These stages are all pretty standard to the genre, with pitfalls filled with deadly spikes, secret treasures, hidden and out-of-place areas, and numerous platforms to jump to. The platforming controls are mostly good. I found Sakuna's movement to be just a little off. It's not quite as fast as I would like it to be, but it's quicker than a typical walk that you would find in a game like Mario. I'm used to holding a sprint button when playing games like this, so it just felt weird that there isn't one here. For more complex platforming, Sakuna has a mystical raiment, or scarf, that she can use to attach herself to walls, ceilings, and even enemies. You'll need to rely on this garment often, so as to avoid many of the game's hazards and to successfully navigate the trickiest of areas, and I think its inclusion does add some originality to the rather basic platforming sections. There are some levels that don't include any monsters to fight, but instead a harvesting area with an abundance of materials to acquire. These places are particularly useful when you're needing to gather certain items and can really aid you when you're crafting. Note, however, that using these gathering spots passes the time quickly, and thus you'll have much less daylight to adventure. When night falls, not only has Sakuna likely become hungry again, but enemies become much more aggressive and hardy. All of their attacks hit harder, their defense becomes tougher, and overall, they can prove to be a real challenge. Visibility also worsens at night, so you'll need to use your valuable supply of oil to light your lantern so as to avoid traps and other perils. This is particularly concerning as oil is one of the most useful cooking ingredients at your disposal, necessary for frying and crafting many other meals, so you don't want to use too much of it doing needless exploring. Each level has a few goals that you will need to complete, from simply reaching the end or defeating a stage boss, to collecting various amounts of random drops, finding well-hidden items, or even slaying foes at nighttime. For each goal that you complete, you'll be awarded a point towards your exploration level. At certain point thresholds, you'll unlock new levels to explore. It's in this way that the game ensures that levels remain replayable, extra challenging, and a little more interesting. There are a few areas in the game that act as dungeons. These stages are very large and have multiple floors or areas that you'll need to explore. Fortunately, they do have checkpoints which allow you to leave and return later, should things get too hairy. Combat is a big part of Sakuna of Rice and Ruin, and you'll be doing a lot of it. Fighting in Sakuna feels a little bit like Super Smash Bros., particularly the Subspace Emissary mode in Brawl. Sakuna has two weapons that she can utilize at any given time, the faster one-handed weapon and the stronger, slower two-handed weapon. Most all of your weapons are gardening tools such as sickles, mallets, ladles, and scythes, and I love this little detail as it gives the game just an extra dash of character. For each weapon, you have a range of attacks that you can use by either pressing or holding a button, or pushing the joystick in a cardinal direction and then pressing or holding a button. Again, it's very much like Smash Bros. Sakuna also learns a variety of special moves when she levels up by farming. These skills range from launching towards an enemy, slamming your weapon down to create a shockwave, spinning in a circle and sending all nearby foes flying, and more. You can equip up to 5 of these at a time, and again, you activate them by either pressing the skill button or moving the joystick in a direction and then hitting the button. Lastly, Sakuna can unlock raiment skills that she can use when latching onto a foe with her scarf. There are 4 of these that can be equipped at a time, and all are triggered by first grabbing onto an enemy and then pressing the joystick in a cardinal direction. I personally use the raiment to quickly move around a foe so I can attack them from behind, as well as cripple their stats with defense, speed, or damage decreasing abilities. All of your special skills and raiment abilities consume magic, so you aren't able to spam these powerful abilities at your leisure. Fortunately, magic refills slowly after just a few seconds, so you don't have to be too cautious when in battle. Combat isn't without its issues, however. For starters, there's no block button, but instead you are able to parry certain attacks by pushing the control stick towards the enemy. I personally have never encountered a system like this before, and I'm curious if there are other games that have done this. This took far too long to get used to, and because the combat can be so hectic, trying to parry led me to being walloped far too often. Thus, I just came to rely on my dodging abilities and the raiment skills to quickly get out of the way. I should note that you do get the ability to block as one of your special skills, but it's available extremely late in the game. In fact, it was literally the last skill I unlocked before finishing, and after experimenting with it for a little while, I felt that it was too little, too late by that point. Should you get hit, and you most certainly will a lot due to the no blocking issue, you can expect to continue getting pummeled until the enemy lets up. This is because Sakuna almost always becomes stunned when she sustains a blow, and there is little to no recovery time. This allows enemies to easily juggle Sakuna while she's in the air, racking up major damage with attacks that you simply cannot escape from. Once she hits the ground, Sakuna will usually take a second or two to slowly get up. During this entire time, she's still susceptible to attack. Thus, you're always at the mercy of the enemy after you suffer that first hit. What makes this even worse is that enemies don't follow the same rules. When your foe hits the ground, they become invulnerable until they stand back up. so you have to wait for them to regain their composure before continuing your onslaught. This just feels unfair, and I hate feeling that the computer has such an unreasonable advantage in the game. These compounding issues led to me facing some very sudden, very frustrating deaths multiple times, to the point that at times I just had to put the game down and walk away. Another problem is once you begin a combo, it's very hard to cancel out of it, so you may end up flailing at the air, facing the wrong direction, and setting yourself wide open to attack should the enemy move out of the way. It would help in these situations to be able to hit a block button and stop attacking, but alas, you need to dash out of harm's way by double tapping the joystick in a direction, and this just isn't nearly as reliable, especially if you begin attacking while in the air. You'll face many hazards while platforming, such as spike pits, rolling rocks, and molten lava. In many platformers, encountering these obstacles can mean instant death, and the good news is that they don't instantly kill you here. But I still feel that the damage that they inflict in comparison to normal enemy attacks is way too much. One clumsy move can remove more than half of your health if you're not careful, and that just seems way too punishing. Rocks in particular make this extremely aggravating because they never move in a fixed route, and instead rely on the game's physics to move. Because of this, you're just as likely to face a small rock hurling at you at lightning speed as you are a large boulder lazily moving down a hillside. The bad thing is, both of these may hit you for the same aggressive damage due to some wonky physics, making plenty of deaths by rocks feel especially cheap. On the plus side to all of this is that there are no lives or anything like that, so when you do die, at least you just continue from the last checkpoint, which is typically when you last entered the area. Time reverts back to when you entered too, so it's really as if nothing has happened and you get a fully clean start at trying the stage again. You can also pause and choose to return to the world map at any time, including during battle, which is a godsend considering how often you'll meet your match to some challenging foes, or when night comes a bit unexpectedly. Enemy variety is quite paltry. You'll encounter the same demon rabbits, boars, sparrows, and skeletons in nearly every level in the game, and it gets old, fast. Enemies are also pretty dumb. Most will use the same attacks over and over again, which is either really easy to avoid or excruciatingly painful, depending on the situation. Also, if there's a trap nearby, you can almost always goad them into running into it repeatedly and killing themselves, which is admittedly pretty hilarious. One final awful part of the game is that just when the story has built up into a climax and you're ready to rush off and defeat the final boss, the game makes you replay most of the levels again to find newly hidden items, all for story reasons. I absolutely hate when developers artificially extend the life of their game by having us replay large swaths of it. It's rarely ever fun, it's annoying as hell, and it just reeks of trite and laziness. Sakuna of Rice and Ruin's art style is perhaps one of its biggest draws. You cannot look at the game and not fall in love with the charming, colorful style. It draws inspiration from such masterfully designed games as Okami and The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, yet it maintains its own identity so that it still truly stands out. Whether you are enjoying the characters' expressive animations or taking in the beautifully crafted levels, you're going to find a lot of eye candy here. The music of Sakuna is equally as wonderful. Composer Hiroyuki Oshima leans heavily into a traditional Japanese sound, mixing taiko drums, wind flutes, and koto string instruments with modern styles, bass guitars, and such. It really reminds me of the excellent music of the Mystical Ninja or Goemon games from Konami. The combat music really gives off a kabuki theater vibe, while gentler themes transported me to a relaxing spot in the middle of a Japanese rock garden. There are plenty of tunes from the soundtrack that I went back to listen to, as it just scratched that itch for me. Sakuna of Rice and Ruin is one of the most difficult games for me to place on either trash or treasure category. It does a lot of things really well, such as the beautiful art style, the inspired music, and the meaningful story. The many frustrations in combat, however, were often too much to bear. They made what fun I was having dramatically dip to anger. I hated feeling like I wasn't in control. Add to that the minor, annoying issues with the farming scenario, and you have a game that's not particularly bad, but has issues that compound into a less than enjoyable experience many times. It absolutely falls into the death by 1,000 cuts category. For this reason, I think if the blending of genres truly interests you, give it a go. But if you are impatient, it may be worth sitting this adventure out. Anyway, here is Wonderwall.